an Unspoiled Network podcast.
This is Spoil Me, covering The Veiled Throne, the third book in the Dandelion Dynasty series, chapters 1, 2, 3, and 4. In these chapters, it has been a minute since I have been in this universe, and I had forgotten just how brutal it is, guys. This is going to be a lot of recapping and me asking questions. Welcome to Spoil Me. Welcome to the show, everyone. I am Natasha. Thank you very much to Kyle for commissioning this episode. So Kyle pointed out, just as I was getting started, that I had not made a announcement on Twitter and whatnot about this episode. And you are right. I forgot to do that. And the reason behind why was because as I was going over what I was going to say for this episode, I realized how many names and details I had forgotten. It's been at least a year. Correct me if I'm wrong, Kyle. I'm actually not positive about that. But it has been quite a while since the last book. We had to wait for this one to be published. And these are some really complex stories with so many characters. And I have lost, as it turns out, a lot more than I expected to. When I thought about the series, I felt like I had a pretty good grasp on things. And then coming back into it for these first 4 chapters, thankfully we spend a lot of our time with the same couple of people, so it's not too confusing. But it still felt like I was out of my depth a little bit. I'm thinking that I may have to, if not go back and re-listen to parts of book 2, at least find some Cliff's Notes to remind me of some parts that I may have lost track of. Especially the second book gets so complex. I feel like the first one, we're just hanging out with Kuni and Matazindu so much that it's a lot easier to sort of follow everything. And this just was... The second one really felt like, all right, we're adding an entire new culture to everything. And now in this third book, I feel like we're doing a sort of figuring out how we're going to create a new universe, kind of. We're meshing the traditions and folklore of 2 different cultures. And it's just going to be, I think, a lot more key for me to know and feel like I'm well versed in the different cultures, and I'm not there. So I just want to warn you, guys, that this first episode is going to be a little bit rocky, because I absolutely didn't remember certain names. People are brought up and I was like, wait, who is that again? And to a point, it's obvious that Ken knew that this was going to be an issue for readers, and so he does try and explain as he goes who is who. And there's also a list of characters at the beginning of the book, but because those characters are sort of divided up by maybe what country they're from or whose allegiance they are, if you don't know that, you're not even sure where to look on the list for that name. Or so just apologies, everybody. I'm going to attempt to get this information a little bit more straight for the next time, but I just really underestimated how much I had forgotten since the last reading. Kyle says, I think we finished book 2 in the summer of 2020. Oh, wow. Really? All right, you know what? I have the dates right here, because that's almost 2 years then. You're right. August 5th, 2020. Wow. All right. So, okay. I don't feel as bad. That's quite a bit of time. A year, that would be difficult enough, but almost 2 years with a story that's like this. All right. That's fair. But I will say, I saw this book on shelves at, I was at a Barnes and Noble, And I saw it and I got so excited as soon as I saw it. I was like, oh my God, I forgot that it came out. So let's start. Part 1, Buried Seeds. Chapter 1, A Night Run. So I'm going to read you guys. The introductions of each chapter remain a bit of information for us as readers about the timing of what's taking place, but because so much has changed and so many different leaders are involved, it used to be like, okay, it was, the third month in the fourth year of the reign of 4 placid seas. But now, I'm going to read this first one. Taten, the seat of the Pekhu of the Lyucu in Ukyu-Gonde, the 5th month in the 12th year after strangers from afar arrived in their city ships, claiming to serve someone named Mapidere. By Dara reckoning, this is the 5th month in the 1st year in the reign of 4 placid seas, when Kunigaru proclaimed himself Emperor Ragin and established his capital in rebuilt Pan. Okay. Like, do you see what I'm saying? Where we're getting pieces of information from each side of the culture and everybody who's affected. So it is just a whole lot. And once I get a hold of it, I'm sure it won't feel quite so overwhelming. But jumping back in after not having gone and revisited the second book, that felt like so much. So we start off with Gostan Ryoto. And Gostan is, by the way, guys, I will be getting the audiobook for this, but I haven't yet. So I'm going to be pronouncing everything based on my own, assumptions and best guesses. But probably the audiobook narrator will have been given the official pronunciations, and thus I will be doing better once I have listened to him. But Gostan is in charge of a, pretty good-sized clan. And she's feeling a little bit embarrassed over the fact that she has several husbands and they are all being real fucking ball breakers, really. It's interesting, too, because she comes out of her tent and the men inside are just arguing with each other. And there's a real sense of rising anger. It's going to start to boil over and become violent. And it's just the sort of thing that you get the vibe. Whatever they're fighting about probably isn't actually important, but they're drunk. And so it feels very important to them right now. And she leaves the tent. And one of the guards helps her out and then begins to talk to her in a way that's actually pretty familiar. And this sort of reminded me that the traditions of her people are going to feel really different from the traditions of Dara, because her people, things are a lot more democratic. And that's not to say that there isn't a hierarchy, because there absolutely is. But these guards are sort of making fun of her feels a little strong, but they're what's the word? They're joshing her, they're giving her a hard time a little bit in good fun, teasing, I suppose could be the word used, in a way that feels like they don't have a ton of respect for her. And that is what she takes away from it for sure, is genuinely these people don't actually really think that I have anything under control. And why would they? Because I'm supposed to be able to keep my husbands in hand, and I'm not even doing that. So how am I supposed to be trusted with a whole clan of people? What I liked about this too is, first of all, we're seeing a woman with a harem of men, which that's not really a frequent thing. And we're also the idea that's often presented when there's a man with multiple women is like, well, you know, bitches be catty, dealing with multiple women is going to be a fucking problem. And there's been a real like pushback in recent years against the narrative that women are the drama starters, because men have been in power for most of human history, at least recorded human history. And it's not like we have been without drama in our recorded human history, and some that had to start from somewhere. So gestures to all of human history, maybe it's not women specifically that are the drama queens. And I really appreciated these like dudes getting put into the place of what role is usually occupied by mostly women. You know what I'm saying? And it's each of the guys is sort of like given a, she goes through each of them and talks about what their particular damage is and the way that they each perceive their position and how they've been wronged. And it is pretty interesting. So let's see. I'm going to jump ahead a little bit here. She starts to go for a run. And she's going for a run during a time that is like, it's reserved for family. It's reserved for like your downtime with the people who are closest to you. And the fact that she's out here taking a jog, she knows is going to get some people like side-eyeing her and wondering why she's not holed up with her guys. And I thought that was like an interesting thing to have this sort of, you know, when you think about the way that we have seen a lot of these people live, it has seemed sort of informal enough that I wouldn't have thought this would have been an issue. But evidently, there is still like a sort of accepted rhythm to the day that she needs to worry about rumors starting. So here we go. Her consorts, aloof Ofta, hot-headed Kiova, crafty Finvatoruli, and sweet, sickly, paranoid Kitan. Ofta's tribe had the most cattle. Kiova's tribe laid claim to the most extensive grazing rights. Finvatoruli's tribe had the least amount of everything except an overabundance of ambition, and Kitan's tribe resisted her in everything, yearning to return to the days before the 5 tribes were united, before she was in charge. Each had his own agenda, pushed for by his tribe's council of elders. Each presented a different claim on her time and affections. Each was trying, in subtle and not so subtle ways, to maneuver himself into the position of being the father of her firstborn. The 5 tribes might be united as one in name, but in reality, they were more like 5 eels forced to share the same narrow cave in the coral reef. So, I mean, this is like a tale as old as time, right? We're going to like make it seem like we're united and that, oh, it's all for one. But really, everybody still has their own loyalties. Everybody still has their own agenda. And they still see the world as us and them. And it's really difficult to like do away with that sort of thing when it hasn't been like this. You know, this sounds like it's sort of a new thing. Her being in charge is like equated with before the 5 tribes were united as one. So either she was completely in charge of this initiative of uniting them, or she was like used as the means of uniting them. Either way, she is sort of like the representation. She's the embodiment of this attempt. And so whether it works or doesn't work is going to be kind of laid at her feet. And that is a really high pressure situation to be in. I don't blame her for deciding that she's just going to go and take a fucking run. Also, I want to mention, and I know that Ken Liu has been so good about this that I shouldn't really be surprised, but it is just, the bar is so low, you guys. At 29, she was in prime fighting shape, stronger and deadlier than she had been during the years when she had fought most of her battles. Do you guys know, if you're a dude listening, do you know how rare it is for a woman to be described as almost 30 and at her prime? And it's so sickening because, like, 29, she's still in her 20s, but 29 is old enough that it's right out. If you're talking about women in their, quote, prime in most media, we're going into like 23, maybe 26 at the oldest. That's the outside of, quote, women in their prime. And really the question is, well, what's the criteria for saying that she's in her prime? And usually what's meant by that is, I want to fuck her the most. That's the prime. The prime when men want to put their dick in the most. Which truly, when you break it down like that, is so pitiful. Like the fact that we have been operating according to this is just so sad. But it remains, I mean, this is still a thing. To this day, there's like whole groups of men on Beyonce's own internet posting about how you want women who are between the ages of like 18 and 22 for optimal obedience, optimal fertility. They haven't yet gotten embittered, which really when they say embittered, what they mean is they haven't grown standards because they haven't realized what complete fuckboys most men are. I couldn't believe how arrested I was by the use of the like age 29, considering how young that still is. Like, it's again, like I said, bar is so low. It's like being really impressed with the inclusivity of a brand using a model that's a size 10. You know, a size 10 is still well within straight sizing and is not actually plus sized. But when models have always been a size 2, it looks like a major change. It's just, we're fucked up, man. That's all I got to say about that. So, she realizes that like this whole thing is not really suited to her temperament. They're trying to sustain a peace, and really she wants to fight. She's like, she likes to break heads, to be honest. She is a battler, and operating like this is just not really her jam, but it's the best way to keep things going at the moment. So she's running and sort of loses track of where she is. And we get a little bit of a look at like the way that things went with her taking her husbands in a single ceremony to show they're all equal. And she even had a weapon made that is supposed to represent their relationship, where the blade is her and the handle is made out of like 4 bones from Garrinafin tied together. And it's just like not being used. She's just bemoaning the fact that she doesn't really get to be a fucking badass anymore, and instead has to sit in this fucking tent listening to these dudes sniping at one another. And this is the way it's going to go now. So we hear about her theorizing, or not even theorizing, but sort of like rehearsing in her head what she's going to say when she goes to see the PICU tomorrow. And essentially she's going to be asking for grazing rights. And she's wondering how she should approach this. I'm going to move my mic. Forgive me, guys, if this is loud in your ear, but I'm leaning forward too much. And she is thinking, what if I just went to the PICU and I said, I am asking for this. Let me tell you each way that my husbands, one by one, think I should handle this situation. And this is one of those moments that I really like, where in lesser fiction, I'm just going to say lesser fiction, you would have this sort of moment where a character is trying to decide what to do, and they think of all of these elaborate ways to say something. And then in the moment that they like go and meet with this leader, the actual truth just comes spilling out, where they just would say, well, he wants me to do this, but he wants me to do this. And then the leader that they're supposed to be like negotiating with would be like, I'm impressed by your frankness, and I know what it's like to be pulled in several different directions and people giving you all sorts of conflicting advice. And because of the fact that you have presented with your entire reality and truth of the situation, I now respect you. No. Like, that's how it would go in things where we're going to have a reasonable, level-headed person in charge. And let's be perfectly honest about humankind. Reasonable, level-headed people are rarely the ones in charge. It does not happen often. At all. At all. Almost ever. So that's just not, like, what's gonna, you know? So she stops and realizes that he would just be disappointed. He would be like, I don't know what you want me to do, figure it out, and then send her off. He would not actually engage with her on what she's trying to negotiate. He would focus, as much as all the other people, on how little she has her own men in control. And she's just so frustrated because she doesn't know how to approach this. So as she's jogging, she comes up against some guards who were trying to keep her from this area. She was approaching Victory Cove, where the city ships from Dara were anchored. The massive hulls, still breathtaking despite years of neglect, blotted out the stars and gently undulated in the sparkling sea, their silvery masts and spars reminding her of the conifer forests near her homeland. City of ghosts, she thought, and shuddered at the memories they brought. So she is like looking at this, and she's hearing a bunch of like people like laughing and dancing. She sees this bonfire, folks are drinking, and she gets stopped by this guard who is like, who the hell are you? Don't come any closer. And she starts to be like, okay, these like city ships aren't really supposed to be worth anything anymore. Why is anybody bothering to guard this? What are they actually guarding? And she begins to sort of like press her luck a little bit. And she goes up to one of the guards and pulls her helmet off and is just like, hey, dickhead, do you not know who the fuck I am? Even if I do have my helmet on, my helmet is pretty fucking like recognizable. You should know who I am. And while they do acknowledge that they know who she is, they then like keep their guard up and they do not let her by. And she's really starting to get salty about this. She's salty enough that she does something a little bit impetuous, and she fights them because she's irritated at the lack of respect they are showing her. And she's sort of taking out the fact that her own people don't seem to respect her on these two guys, because she just wants somebody to take her fucking seriously. And when they tell her, like, you have to go back to Tatin, she's like, oh, do I have to go? Because I really just don't think you would talk like this to anybody that wasn't me. I wonder if you dare speak this way to the Thane of the 4 Cacti, with his retinue of dozens always around him. I wonder if you'd bar the way of the Thane of the 16 tribes of the Boneyard, born everywhere on a cattle litter. Just because my followers are few and my tribe remote, you dare to bark at me like ill-mannered curs, sworn to protect the road to those ships, aren't you? I'm the one who captured those ships. And as much as these guys do sort of like cower a little bit, they don't actually let her by. So this is when she gets into the fight, and she just completely levels these two dudes. Like, it's not even close. It's truly, it's simultaneously, it's very impressive on her part, but a little bit humiliating on their part. And I really appreciated that this young girl who comes up, she sends them away, and she follows it up with like, don't worry, I know that you got injured just trying to like faithfully carry out your orders, and I'll definitely tell my dad that's what you were doing. There was something in me that was like weirdly relieved about that. There's a thing that like happens, and it's an accurate depiction, but I was talking about this recently with Rashawn because we're covering Song of Ice and Fire, and there are moments where people who are in power sort of, they intimidate their way into a situation by playing off the fact that they are of a higher rank than whatever servant they're attempting to boss around. And the servant is deferring to that rank in the only way they can while keeping their position, keeping their life sometimes. But then if it turns out that the person they were speaking with who gave them this order that they shouldn't have obeyed, if it turns out they were doing something that the even one level above thinks they shouldn't have been, it's that poor little peasant who's going to wind up getting all the hell for it. They are going to catch the punishment that more than likely will not be meted out on the noble, right? And yet, what could they have done? What possible protest could they have made that would not have resulted in them potentially being like dismissed or killed or whipped, you know, if they had actually like held their ground and disobeyed this person that was actually standing in front of them who had the power. So it's always just given me such anxiety to see the way that, like, you know, the common folk are treated in these moments. And it gave me a little bit of, I don't know, it just lessened my anxiety, I guess, that this little girl was like, hey, don't worry, guys, I got you. I don't know if she really does got them. It's unclear how much I can trust her word, but I think she means well. I think she meant it when she said it, really, is what it comes down to. Whether or not she'll actually remember to follow through, we'll see. So, this girl that comes up, she is riding a Garinnafin who is not doing super well. And as we find out later, this is a Garinnafin that is like not actually owned by anybody yet because it's too young. And this little girl is sort of in competition for it with her brother. Her father has said it's going to her brother because he's older and he's going to be going into battle sooner than she is. But she does not care for that reasoning at all. And says that just because she's the youngest, she never gets anything. And has decided that she's going to try and like take it out and get it to like basically imprint upon her if she can get it to. And yet she hasn't taken into account how young it is. And so it begins to sort of foam at the mouth and become really overexhausted because it shouldn't be being ridden. It shouldn't even really necessarily be flying that much. It's the kind of like, it's so young that it would probably be carried a lot of places. But that all comes up a moment later. A 10-year-old girl who is called Pecutasa. She tells these guards, I know what my father's orders are. And she asks this woman for her name. And when she gets the name, she tells the guards, call off the alarm. The Thane is my guest. And when they try to argue, we don't know who she is, if she's actually who she says, she tells them, I know exactly who she is. How can you not know? The veteran of some of the like greatest wars. And it's such a great play. Ghostan figures it out like pretty quickly, but she does get taken in for a second here. This girl plays on her pride and flattery and vanity by just being like, oh, of course, anybody knows who this woman is. And later on realizes, how could she know? She's so young. She would never even have seen me before, more than likely. And how would she just recognize me? That doesn't even make any sense. But she wanted so much to believe it in the moment and just let it ride, you know, which I think most of us would do. If somebody comes at us and they say something that we like to think about ourselves, we're going to go with it a lot of the time. Not always. It of course depends on how they're going to like try and smooth your feathers as well, because some of us are very aware of ways in which we actually fall short. And if a person like tried to flatter us using certain words or appealing to certain alleged skills we had, if you have self-awareness, you'd be like, wait, I'm not good at that. What? This doesn't even sound like me. No. Okay, he's just blowing smoke up my ass. But if it is something that you feel a particular actual pride in for yourself, that you're like, yeah, I did do that. And wow, somebody finally noticed. This is a very easy, soft spot for people to get at you with, you know? So she's talking to this woman and like asking her about who she is when, Ghost Han is like trying to sort of prove to the girl, who I sort of want to call her a princess, but I'm not really sure if that's the right terminology, but it's like similar. Ghost Han keeps trying to be like, oh, okay, so one, you don't know who I am. Two, you stole that Garinafin, because clearly it's not supposed to be being ridden yet. Just overall, Ghost Han keeps trying to prove, I know what you're actually up to versus what you were telling those guards you're up to. And it seems like they're kind of like vibing a little bit. But then there comes this moment. I should have learned more, but don't tell me you always did exactly as you were told when you were my age. Ghost Ten sighed. Her voice softened when she spoke again. You do have me there. My mother, who was Thane before me, was bonded to a big bull Garinafin, incredibly bad-tempered. He was supposed to be impossible to ride. Of course, I decided that I had to try, even though his saddle was so wide that when I finally climbed up, my legs were horizontal like I was doing a split. She didn't notice the sudden change in Vaju's expression as she listened to Ghost Hunt's story, nor did she see the young girl slowly reach for the club lying at her feet, and she certainly was not prepared when the girl reared back and slammed the club into the back of her head. So, it turns out that this girl thinks that she caught an error in Ghost Hunt's telling of her own story that proves that Ghost Hunt is not actually who she says she is. And it actually is not as cut and dried as that, but this girl really fucking thinks that she figured out a thing. And I really enjoy the way that this is told going forward, because essentially Ghost Hunt is recognizing in this little girl how she has decided XYZ is true, and that she has like outwitted somebody who's older than her. And when a kid thinks that they've like got one up on an adult, or that they've like cracked a code or figured out a secret, it's really hard to get them to let go of that idea, because then everything that somebody can present to them proving that that's not actually what's going on can be somehow twisted to instead be in support of their original theory, which is the kind of circular thinking that I think a lot of us have probably encountered on the internet the past few years. Kyle says, this isn't a spoiler, by the way. Vaju is Tanvanaki from Book 2, the Peku's daughter. Oh. I thought Tanvanaki was older. Tanvanaki, did she marry Timu? Oh, didn't he marry somebody? I am so not sure if I have this right. God. She's older in the present. Okay, so we've gone back in time here. Gotcha. Well, I know we've gone back in time, but like didn't realize quite how far back. Yeah. She does that objectionable, creepy marriage with Timu. Oh, she's the one that like, oh God, I forgot. She's real sketch. Shit, I forgot that she's so creepy. Right. What a shame. Okay, so she is asking, who are you really? And Ghostan is just like, dude, I fucking told you. Why did you do this? And the girl is like, look, I'm not worried about any of the people who saw this going and telling my dad or doing anything, because they're about to sail off tomorrow and they won't see my father again for years, if ever. But I know that you were lying because you said two different things. And let's see, I'm trying to find it. You can't fool me that easily. No one here is old enough to have fought the Dara barbarians or seized the city ships. You were counting on that, weren't you? That's why you stole the identity of a hero from an obscure tribe who rarely visits Tatan, knowing that no one here would be able to definitively say you aren't the person you claim to be. You could go back to the Great Tent. Do you think I'm 5? I'm certainly not going to bring one of my father's old retainers here so they can run into Corva on the way. You could take them the long way round and approach the cove from the other side. Right. Of course you'd want me to take the long way round so you'd have more time alone to escape and carry out some evil scheme. I may not know your plan yet, but I'm going to figure it out. And she's like, all right, fine. Yeah, I'm definitely doing all those things. What are you going to do with me then? And she just looks at Ghostan and points at her eye like, I'm going to watch you. Until when? Until the fleets set sail in the morning and Corva has recovered. Then I'll get Corva and escort you back to Tatan. Since I caught you, a dangerous spy, I won't get in trouble for stealing Corva. In fact, Father may even give Corva to me as a reward. It's all going to work out for the best. And there's a moment here where Ghostan is thinking, actually, this will be hilarious. Because you stole a Garinafin and then caught somebody who is actually who they say they are, thinking that they were a spy, and kept them locked up, and you're going to look like such a moron that when your father actually figures out what you did, you're probably never going to get your hands on this Garinafin, and he'll probably tan your hide for doing something so impetuous and so clueless. But then she has to take a step back and be like, wait a second. If that happens, I'm going to have been the source of his favorite daughter's humiliation, which, while that is not necessarily my fault for getting in the middle of things to begin with, if I remain her prisoner overnight, a 10-year-old's prisoner, he is going to think I'm a fucking joke, and I'm going to have been the person who caused his daughter to lose face in front of everybody, which is not going to look good for him and warm him to my cause at all. So then I will probably not get what I have come here to negotiate for in the first place. And I really appreciated her turning around and thinking about this in a different way. She's looking at the psychology of it, because it's really easy to look at what rationally should be the way things would go, which would be, oh yeah, I was, wrongfully captured, and he's going to realize that his daughter did a stupid thing and punish her. And then he's going to feel like he owes me. That's something that some people might expect to happen. And instead, she knows the Pekyu's what his value system is completely circles around the appearance of strength. And having been taken by a little girl and held overnight isn't the appearance of strength. There's going to be no respect in that. So we get intermixed with this, a series of stories. And this is a sort of ongoing thing in these first 4 chapters. I'm wondering if it's going to be a thing throughout the whole book. I know that Ken Liu, he drops in stories in the other books as well. But I felt like they were a lot denser and closer together in these first 4 chapters than they have been in others. And it might just be that I'm not remembering them. But I had a hard time a little bit with the constant dipping in and out of the actual narrative and then going into a story and then coming back out of that story into the regular narrative again. And I really wonder how this is done in the audiobooks, because at least reading it in text, you're seeing that the stories that are being told around her are italicized. But I feel like this would maybe be pretty confusing as an audiobook. So she's listening to the story about like a shark that is pretending to be a dolphin. And as she is like hearing this and it's sort of washing over her, she's continuing this conversation with Vaju. How can you be so sure I'm a spy? Tell me again your lineage. I am called Ghost Tanrioto, daughter of Dayu Ryoto, son of Pefir Vagape. I serve the Pekyu as the Thane of Liar. You almost had me, but you're just like that wolf pup in the old tale. You can't hide your true nature. When we were with Korva, you said your mother was Thane before you, and yet you just named your father in your birthright lineage, not your mother. So either you're an imposter who didn't prepare your lies well enough, or you're a usurper, and my father would never have tolerated a usurper as one of his trusted Thanes. And she can't help but like giggle a little internally, because the idea that he wouldn't tolerate a usurper is so absolutely not correct that she's genuinely like, I don't even know how you could think that would be true. Like, it is common knowledge how this guy got to his position. And again, it's the show of strength that is really the thing that is respected. So if you are usurped, you weren't strong enough to keep your spot. And that's sort of your fucking bad. So this is when it says she finally caught a glimpse of the gesticulating figure of the storyteller by the bonfire, and she realized why his voice seemed so familiar. And then we go to chapter 3, the message on the turtle shell. Ukugonde, the year the city ships arrived from Dara, known in Dara as the first year in the reign of righteous force, when Emperor Irishi ascended to the throne after the death of Emperor Mapidare. Okay, so this is a while back at this point. Kyle says, I will say that like stories and by extension culture is a big thing in this book. Okay, I mean, and that, I guess, makes sense, because my assertion at the start was like, the first book we are getting basically Dara's most recent history. In the second book, we're introducing a whole new culture and the clash between the two. And in the third book, we have the attempt to move forward and meld those cultures together somehow. So the cultures being at the central pillar of this plot does jibe. That makes a lot of sense. So, okay, yeah. Kyle says this flashback is occurring around the beginning of the plot of book 1. That's okay, good. That's where I was imagining things. So we are learning about Ghostan and the way that she was brought up. And essentially, she was a fucking maniac. She was a killer, loved it, big fan, loved killing. She took slaves. She was absolutely committed to her tribe of people. And we find out a little bit later that it's not like she never stopped to think about the contradictions in the way they lived and the way their stories went. She noticed those contradictions. But as with so many people, if you tell them a way that things got started and then it conflicts with the way that things are now, i.e. conflicts with your like alleged ideals of how the world should function, you just kind of can hand wave that and just be like, well, you know, things changed. There's other stories about that. And most people just sort of accept that. Like, it's a really difficult thing to find a lot of people who will push back against a narrative that an entire group that they share their daily lives with accepts as true. And when you're in a bigger population, it's easier to push back against a narrative because it's not as like, the consequences of pushing back aren't as acute because it's, you're like, I don't want to say anonymous, but you're not necessarily going to be pushing back in a way that feels threatening. But when you're in a small tribe of people and these are the stories that are being handed down, it's going to draw a lot more attention if you start to suggest that maybe the stories are not correct, or maybe the ways that we're living now don't line up with the way that allegedly we're supposed to be living according to these stories. There's just a much more focused consequence in pushing back when you're in a smaller group. And this has been like proven scientifically when they have groups of people who all, you know, that whole thing, like you put a dot on the wall, ask what color it is. Everybody says it's green except for one person. And the dot is actually blue, but they watch to see whether the person who is seeing blue either says, guys, what are you talking about? It's clearly blue. Or if they just go, no, it's green, along with everyone else. And they have seen that if there's a larger group and those people are all saying it's green, it is a lot more likely for that lone person to say it's green. If it's only 5 people and 4 of them say it's green and there's one person who sees it's blue, it's a lot more likely that he'll say something because he's not pushing back against as many people. And I feel like it's sort of inverted when you go into like a city situation and you've got like a lot of people around you who are, you feel like I can't possibly be the only one that's thinking this, right? There have to be other people around here. But when you're in like a tight-knit clan where you've got elders in a very specific position, the survival of your crew depends on everybody being unified in their belief and their overall, like, nationalism is the wrong word, but you get what I mean. It's gonna feel a lot more risky to not go along with everything. And so that's what I mean. It's like, it's a weird inversion of this principle, in my opinion. So we go to the whole situation with these disgusting Dara dudes who we have met before. And I don't remember, again, I know that I've seen these names and I remember this guy being a piece of shit. And I don't remember exactly how they get taken care of, but I'm pretty sure that the women wind up like murdering them, I'm thinking is what happened. But Admiral Krita is the guy who is in charge of this situation for the moment. And this is the colonization of the area. These guys from Dara are coming in, enslaving the native people, raping the women, taking the resources, and just acting like, you fools, how could you be so primitive, but not know how to take care of themselves at the same time, because that's beneath them. And so this leads to a pretty interesting thing with this like turtle shell that gets used as a portent of the greatness of Dara and the like God's plan for Dara to be the, what's the word I want? The dominant force over her own people. And the turtle shell is made in such a way that Krita thinks, how could this possibly be anything but made by the gods? It's made with a tool that, like, I've never even seen these folks, the Lyucu, use before. But we find out later that it's actually extremely common, to the point where she's kind of like, wait, but he has to have seen this before. Why isn't he recognizing this art style? It's all over the place. I mean, even children are playing with toys that are etched in this way. And later on, when she's talking to Olga, she says this. Ghostan is like, how does he not recognize it? And I was thinking the exact same thing that Olga says, which is basically, he's never bothered to look at anything. He just assumes he's better than you guys. He just assumes that, like, the way that he knows how things are done is superior. And anything that's made by you is assumed to be extremely primitive and not worth anything. So, yeah, he hasn't noticed that this is an art style y'all use, because if he ever actually stopped and looked around at what you guys have accomplished, then he would start to realize that we aren't superior. But he isn't, and he won't. So I can do this, and he doesn't even notice. So this scene starts actually with Dathama, who I believe is below Krita. Am I correct with that? Or is Dathama's Krita's last name? Are they the same person? I might be getting that mixed up. But they are going for like a walk on the beach, except it's not a walk for him because he's going to be carried in a litter. And this is during the period where she and the other women have been instructed to like bear the shame and humiliation of being raped and put into subjugation, because they are going to bide their time and get their revenge eventually. Okay, cool. Kyle says this dude is one of the captains and Krita is the admiral. Thank you, Kyle. So one of these dudes stumbles and he orders these men to be whipped for tripping because he spills wine on his silk robe. And it's really like one of those scenes where she's looking around at the men and the expression on their faces, and the whole game they're playing relies on these men biding their time and holding it in and playing it cool for right now. And she is seeing that some of them look like they are about to fucking pop right now. Like they do not want to let this dude get away with this. But then Olga steps in and is like, oh my God, I can't believe I found this amazing thing. And Olga has the turtle shell that he is using as a portent. And what's interesting here is that Dathama is aware this is bullshit, but he thinks that it can be played to his advantage. And Olga sort of feeds into the theories that are forming in his mind in such a way that Dathama starts to be like, oh, cool. So this guy is totally on board because he is giving me the credit of having found this thing. And if I can take the credit for it, then like what this symbolizes allegedly is going to have a lot more to do with me and will gain me more respect, and it will potentially be able to like get me to outshine my political adversaries, because the people who support our positions are very superstitious, and they'll fall for this like goofy shit. So as long as Olga is like completely on board to play along the way that I need him to, which he appears to be, I will be able to get ahead somehow using this. So yeah, this whole thing is played like Dathama thinks that he's being so fucking clever and thinks that he's playing a game, but obviously it's Olga who's playing the game. So we go from there to her talking to Olga Kidosu. Oh, Kyle says, Oga, by the way, is the father of Zomi Kidosu, one of the main protags, who she assumed was lost at sea, but got right. And she takes that test and then, like, basically tells Kuni, like, this test is bullshit and you guys are really not being fair in how you're administering it and everything. She's delightful. Okay, so... What Ghost Hunt does here is she creates a scene by holding on to this turtle shell and pretending that she's like so overcome by it. And she uses really broken English to like talk, and I say English, but it's broken Dara really, to describe what it is that she's looking at, because the whole thing is supposed to be that she and her people are instructed to not teach the colonizers any Lyucu language if they can avoid it, and to learn as much of the speech of Dara as they can while not letting on how much they understand. And that way, these men will continue to just speak freely around them, and they'll be able to scoop up all kinds of knowledge without anybody ever being guarded, because they think that these idiot natives don't have any idea what they're saying. And I love the fact that Dathama has renamed Ghostan Obedience because he doesn't want to learn her actual name. And this is just such a fucking thing that happened. Y'all, like some of the names that women used to have. I was just recently, I covered a Brando Sando short story for Spoil Me called Shadows for Silence in the Forests of Hell, which is just such a name. But there is a character in it that he named after a name that he got going through a bunch of like records of the Puritans. And it was a woman's name, and it was Silence. And he turns it around for his story and makes the name Silence badass. But just thinking about somebody naming a woman Silence, like, and that was not something assigned to a woman who was native. That was like the name she was given when she was born, is wild to me. Like, holy shit, you know, do we give men names like this? And it just makes me wonder, like, obedience feels like something that would probably actually have been done either exactly that way, or they'd look up, like, what's the Latin word for obedience, and they'd make, like, a weird version of it sort of thing. But yeah, so she, like, pretends that she's, like, basically having a seizure, and she manages to get the men around her to follow her suit. And it's not like Dathama is a complete idiot, because he does have a moment of just like, I don't know about this. This doesn't seem right. But also what they're doing sort of feeds into the story that he's trying to craft for himself. So he's like, all right, I'm not going to look a gift horse in the mouth. If they want to pretend they were completely overcome by the like majesty of this icon, I guess that works for me. So then we go to her talking to Oga. And he begins speaking to her in Lyucu, and she has a moment of just like, wait, what? Because they weren't supposed to teach him the language. And he stops at one point because he doesn't know the word for brothers. And she tells him the word and helps him before realizing like she's explicitly breaking rules and orders that she's been given. So what he does here, this is so interesting to me because her reaction is completely understandable. And his puzzlement is also completely understandable. Like the both of them are coming at this from such different perspectives that I completely see why they don't understand one another at all. I personally, as a filthy colonizer myself, understand his perspective more than hers, because I am not somebody who has sacred stories that are important to me in my life. this is just never, I was raised in like, in such a way that religion has always been a completely like theoretical thing for me, as much as my father wanted it to be something that I took seriously and that was real. So for me, you know, there are all of these like stories from the Bible that I was taught, but also my mother was like a Wiccan pagan. And so she told me about all these different stories of like goddesses and things, and goddesses from all different pantheons. We've got Celtic goddesses, we've got Egyptian goddesses, we've got Indian goddesses, like, you know, it's all over the place. But I don't have anything that means so much to me that changing it feels like blasphemy, essentially. It's not like I can intellectually understand what is going on with her, but I can't emotionally really resonate with it because I don't have that kind of relationship with anything. You know, the thing that I could like come closest to is maybe a fandom that I'm super into, and finding out that somebody is like retelling these stories, but like changing them. And even that, like, people write fan fiction all the time. So that doesn't feel like a fair comparison either. And it's not something that I really have a problem with. So what we have here is him trying to connect with her a little bit, and her beginning to see him as like somebody who isn't like the rest of the men from Dara. And he explains to her the way that rank works in Dara, and she's realizing that it's very similar to the hierarchy of her own people. He's trying to explain to her what the word peasant is, and she's starting to realize, like, is that sounds like the slaves that we have. And when she realizes that like Dara people are treated just as shitty as by their lords as a lot of her people are treated by her own captors, like she's just kind of like, wait, so they're picking on us, but they're also picking on their own people. And he's like, that's how it be. So this is when we go to him telling her a story. And we get chapter 4, storytellers. And we get Lyucu and Tazu. And these are gods that are familiar to us as readers. We have met them before, literally and figuratively. And they're talking about mortals and how intelligent they are, and whether or not they can ever match the wisdom of the gods, because they just don't have the capacity for knowledge that the gods do. And to sort of like sum this up, they go to 2 different animals, a whale and a shrimp, and ask them each to describe the ocean. And each of them gives a completely different like experience with it. The whale says the ocean is a boundless realm of desolation in which massive, sleek lords careen, each as lonely as a star in heaven. And then the little shrimp says, a warm, inviting cloud of living water that surrounds the rainbow-hued terraces of my city. We make our homes in reef caves whose walls were studded with jewel-like shells. And both gods step back and tell the other about the perspective. And they're like, whale, does this sound like the ocean to you, what this shrimp just said? And shrimp, does whale's description of the ocean seem at all familiar to you? And both of them are like, no, that is not my experience at all. And I'm a little bit sad that I'm never going to get to see that perspective at all. And the gods sort of like back up and talk to each other. And Lyucu says, I don't know. I guess they can't be as wise as we are just because they have such short lives and there's no possible way for them to ever get to experience everything that's out there. the way that we can as gods, looking down on everything and knowing everything. And Tazu is like, I don't know. They only experience a short life, but the stories that they tell one another increases their understanding and their perspective. And as they hand those stories down continually, they begin to grow in that sense. Through that yearning by the finite for the infinite, the portraits painted by all the mortal eye may yet piece together a grander truth than our own divine understanding. And this was why, from then on, Lutho asked remoras to attach themselves close to the eyes of dome-headed whales, so that the little fish could clean parasites and dead skin off the giant eyelids, so that the small might share their stories with the grand as brother and sister, so that the magnificent finned lords of the ocean might see realities with more care and clarity. And this was why, from then on, Tazu's storms periodically tossed the tiny inhabitants of coral reefs onto distant and strange shores filled with alien leviathans and antipodal krill and antipodal, I don't know how to say that word, so that they could see what they never would have seen, so that they could hear stories they never would have heard, and tell stories they never would have told, so that their natures could be nurtured by new experiences. So then he asks her for a story. And at first, she starts to resist, saying she's not a storyteller. And he's like, no, but you are, though. I mean, everybody is. And she begins to tell the story of the creation of the world by Liluroto, the All-Father, and Diarura, the Every-Mother. The Every-Mother is a giant cow, I think. And Liluroto is a wolf. And they are going over like the planet and basically like fucking and fighting and fucking and fighting and just like creating life everywhere. And this is why all of us like it said later, this is why the pleasure of sex is no different than the pleasure of battle. And I was like, really starting to explain a lot about the way y'all live your lives out there. So they create this world and they put all of these like children that begin to complain about the way that the world is and the lives that they're forced to live. And the All-Father and Every-Mother are trying to make it better and keep changing things in order to make their children happier and more content. And it's just not really working out. It doesn't feel like they're ever satisfied with anything. So they create this like paradise, essentially. Instead of treasuring the gift of the gods, the humans set to despoiling it. Instead of simply taking what the land gave willingly, they tried to tame the land to force it to yield more. Instead of praising the gods for their generosity, they fought amongst themselves, striving to claim to be as gods themselves. Instead of working together as one people, they celebrated division and discord. And as they warred with one another, they forgot about the gods. So, eventually, there's like, just, it's complete chaos. The gods sort of are like, you know what, let them fucking screw it up then, and we'll go off and we're going to do our own thing. And these two people sort of arise out of this, Kikisavo and Aphir. And I think Aphir is a woman and Kikisavo is a guy. Let's see. Kikisavo, who had 6 fingers on each hand, had the strength of 10 bears, and his voice was as loud as thunder. Aphir, who had 6 toes on each foot, had the endurance of 10 spiral-horned muflon, and her feet were quick as lightning. The two were such good friends that they thought of themselves as Votan Satasa. They called each other my breath. And these two go around trying to find the way back to paradise by asking all of these different animals. And they get into fights with each of them and subdue them until they tell them a secret about how to like live more happily and more productively in a way that will like, you know, give them new tools and stuff. And at the end of this story, because it's a quite long story with all, we get the encounter with every single animal, but I'm like way over time, so I cannot do that. We have her talking to Oga, and she realizes that he is telling her the story that like in a way that would appeal to her. She recalled little details that seemed to be inspired by her homeland. The etching spine of the cactus, dwellings made from bones and hides, the hint of an ethos of dauntless courage and warfare as a way of life. Oga had probably thought they would make the story more appealing to her, make her think well of him, without the arrogance of the other Dara barbarians, respectful to her and her people, to gain her trust. She was alarmed by how close he had come to succeeding. The very thought he had been trying to manipulate her was revolting. But more than that, something about the way he had marshaled the details about what he knew of her people bothered her. And later on, because at first she's like, I can't even put my finger on why this pisses me off so much. Later on, she's talking about how everything was made up because he changed stories because they were not sacred to him. And I'm trying to find the spot where she says the thing about, here it is, the spices. So he had incorporated bits of what he knew, the craft of shell and bone etching, the art of using the skin and bone of the dead for shelter, the joy of affirming one's existence in battle. These were strands of her way of life, as inseparable from her as arteries and sinews. Yet Oga had stolen these things, just like how he had stealthily spied on her people to learn her language, just like how he had sneakily copied the art of cactus etching and placed them into his story like bits of decoration, like baubles to entertain children, like the treasures of her people seized by the lords of Dara to add a dash of primitive color to their cabins. He had stolen them, but he had not understood them. Instead, he had reduced them to twisted, meaningless caricatures in his story, sprinkled some spices, as he put it, and he had been arrogant enough to think that she would be pleased. Appropriation, ladies and gentlemen. This is just like, and again, I get why he doesn't understand. Because he thinks, I'm trying to connect with you. And I am using things that you understand and that are important to you to demonstrate how alike we are because we're both people. He thinks that he's bridging a gap. But she is like, you came in here and have enslaved us. And now you're trying to use our shit to like be like, oh, well, we're really not so different, when you actually don't understand how sacred they are, because obviously your stories aren't sacred to you because you just fucking tell whatever and just change it whenever you want because of who you're talking to. So we clearly do not see this shit the same way, which means that you don't understand how important this is all to us, and thus you have no fucking right to talk about it or do anything with it at all. Don't you dare. And I am not mad at her. She is disgusted, like actively revolted by him. And in the end, she's like, you're actually not that different from Dathama, actually. Wow, I can't believe that I almost fell for that. And again, she like stalks out and he still doesn't get what he did. He truly doesn't understand it. And this is just like such white people shit. You know, like this is just such a thing. White people are always doing too much, thinking that they're like, you know, it's the same, like sort of, but I'm just trying to connect with you. I'm trying to, and it's like, it's not for you though. It's not yours. Don't. And it's something that you see from people who really do mean well, I think, at their core, but they have not grasped enough how important it is to whomever they're speaking with to treat it with like the respect it actually deserves, because they don't have a connection to something of their own, I think, that means the same thing to them a lot of the time. I think they're in a similar position to me. So it's just a really difficult thing to wrap your head around what it means to a culture for whom this is like their entire world, when your culture is made up of taking things from other people. Like, low key, you know, like when that's all you've ever done, you just you stop seeing the problem with it. It's just, I don't know. I found this whole scene to be really like compelling and well done, because when it's told from her perspective, you see exactly what she means. Whereas if we were in Oga's perspective, I think we would be a little bit more like, why is she so angry? I don't really understand. And I'm so glad that we see it from hers instead. And we get a look at just like, I was nearly seduced by this bullshit. That was so close. Wow. And that's the end of the chapter. So I am really excited to see what happens with her, because she's super interesting. I'm way over time, so I really have to wrap. But thank you, Kyle, very much for commissioning this. The next episode is going to be Friday, March 18th. So next week. And I will try and refresh my memory on the previous book a little bit before that, so that I can hopefully have a slightly better grasp on things next time. All right, guys. Thank you again so much for listening. Hope you're enjoying it. And until next time, toodaloo, motherfuckers.
That was an Unspoiled Network podcast.